The letter fell from the beggar's coat pocket at the exact moment Sarah Chin stepped over his outstretched legs without looking down. It landed face up on the dirty concrete of Fifth Avenue, the yellowed envelope stark against the grime, but no one noticed. Not Sarah, rushing toward her interview at Goldman Sachs with her leather portfolio clutched against her chest. Not Marcus Webb, the hedge fund manager who sidestepped the homeless man with practiced precision while checking his phone for the morning stock reports. Not even Father Timothy O'Brien, who had dedicated 40 years to serving the poor but was late for a budget meeting with the archdiocese and merely nodded apologetically as he passed. The beggar's name was Thomas Reed, though no one had asked him that in 7 years. He sat with his back against the marble facade of a luxury department store, a cardboard sign propped against his knees that read, "Veteran. Anything helps. God bless." His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, and his fingers trembled slightly from the cold that had seeped into his bones during the night. He didn't notice the letter fall. He had carried it for so long that its absence felt like nothing at all. The morning rush continued its relentless flow around him. Thousands of footsteps. Hundreds of conversations. Dozens of coffee cups held by hands that would never extend toward his empty palm. The city breathed and moved and lived, and Thomas Reed was simply part of the scenery, as invisible as the fire hydrants and mailboxes. But destiny, that strange architect of moments, had already begun its work. At 8:52 a.m., a gust of wind sent the letter skittering across the sidewalk. It traveled 15 feet before catching against the wheel of a street vendor's cart. The vendor, a man named Hassan who sold coffee and bagels from a stainless steel cart he'd bought with his life savings, noticed the envelope and picked it up, curiosity flickering in his eyes. The paper was old, delicate, the kind that belonged to another era. The address was written in elegant script, but it had faded to near illegibility. What caught Hassan's attention was the wax seal on the back, still intact despite the years, pressed with an intricate design he couldn't quite make out. He looked toward Thomas, saw the man's eyes still closed, his face gaunt and weathered. Hassan had seen him there every morning for the past 3 years, had even bought him coffee once or twice when business was good. Now he hesitated, the letter in his hand, something about it making him uneasy. Marcus Webb returned at that exact moment, having forgotten his briefcase in the back of his town car. He moved quickly, efficiently, a man who calculated every second of his day down to the minute. He saw Hassan holding the envelope and made the connection immediately, his eyes darting to the homeless man against the wall. "That fell from him?" Marcus asked, his voice clipped. Hassan nodded. "Just now. The wind caught it." Marcus extended his hand. "I'll return it to him." But Hassan didn't hand it over. Something in him resisted, though he couldn't have explained why. "I can do it," he said. Marcus frowned. People didn't refuse him. His time was worth thousands of dollars per hour, and yet here he stood, held in place by a peculiar insistence in the vendor's eyes and an envelope that looked like it had survived a war. Sarah Chin came running back up the street at 8:56 a.m., her heel broken, her interview in shambles before it even began. She'd made it 2 blocks before her expensive shoe betrayed her, sending her stumbling into a newsstand. Now she limped back toward the subway station, her eyes burning with frustrated tears, her carefully constructed morning destroyed. She noticed the 2 men standing by the coffee cart, their attention fixed on something, and slowed despite herself. Father O'Brien emerged from a taxi at 9:02 a.m., having forgotten his reading glasses in the church. He'd turned the car around halfway to the archdiocese, much to the driver's irritation. As he paid the fare, he saw the small crowd that had formed on the sidewalk. 3 people now. 4. 5. All gathered around Hassan's cart, looking at something in his hands. The priest approached, his collar marking him in the morning crowd. "What's happening here?" Hassan looked up, relief crossing his features. "Father. This letter. It fell from that man's pocket." He gestured toward Thomas, who remained motionless against the wall. "I think it's old. Important, maybe. But I don't know if I should open it. It's not yours to open, Marcus said sharply. Just wake him up and give it back. Sarah had drawn closer, her broken heel forgotten. She could see the envelope now, and something about it called to her, tugged at a place deep in her chest that had nothing to do with job interviews or career trajectories. Has anyone tried to wake him? She asked quietly. They all turned to look at Thomas Reed. In the growing morning light, he seemed more shadow than substance, his coat hanging on a frame that had once been substantial but was now reduced to angles and hollows. His stillness suddenly seemed less like sleep and more like something else. Father O'Brien moved first. He crossed the space in 3 strides and knelt beside Thomas, his hand reaching out to touch the man's shoulder. Sir. Sir, are you all right? No response. The priest's fingers found Thomas's neck, pressing against cold skin, searching. His face changed. Call 911, he said, his voice carrying the weight of too many moments like this. Now. Sarah already had her phone out, her fingers moving across the screen. Marcus stood frozen, his briefcase hanging from his hand. Hassan set the letter carefully on his cart and pulled out a blanket he kept for cold mornings, bringing it to Father O'Brien. The ambulance arrived at 9:14 a.m. The paramedics worked. With practiced efficiency, their faces showing nothing as they checked for vital signs, administered oxygen, loaded Thomas Reed's unresponsive body onto a stretcher. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, the drama over, the morning commute reasserting its claim on their attention. But Sarah, Marcus, Hassan, and Father O'Brien remained. They stood together, strangers bound by a moment they didn't understand, their eyes moving between the departing ambulance and the envelope that still lay on Hassan's cart. Someone should go with him, Sarah said. To the hospital. He shouldn't be alone. I'll go, Father O'Brien said immediately. But the letter. Marcus reached for it, his movements decisive. I'll take care of it. If he's. He didn't finish the sentence. If there's a family, they'll want his belongings. Hassan shook his head. We should open it. Together. Now. Maybe there's information inside. Contact details. Something. That's personal property, Marcus began, but Sarah interrupted. He's right. If there's someone to notify, we need to know. The 4 of them looked at each other, this accidental congregation. The priest in his collar. The vendor in his stained apron. The financier in his $3,000 suit. The young woman with a broken shoe and mascara smudged beneath her eyes. Destiny had gathered them like scattered leaves. Father O'Brien reached for the envelope. I'll do it, he said. If there's sin in this, let it be on me. He broke the wax seal carefully, the brittle material crumbling in his fingers. The envelope opened with a whisper of old paper. Inside was a single letter, folded precisely, and something else. A photograph, black and white, creased with age. The priest withdrew the photograph first. 4 men in military uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, standing in front of what looked like a field hospital. They were young, impossibly young, their faces bright with something that might have been hope or might have been the desperate brightness of those who know darkness is coming. One of them could have been Thomas Reed, 50 years younger, a lifetime ago. The letter was written in the same elegant script as the address. Father O'Brien's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. He read silently at first, his eyes moving across the lines, and then he looked up at the others, his face pale. Read it aloud, Sarah said softly. The priest's voice was steady despite the shake in his hands. My dearest Thomas, I am writing this on October 14, 1968, though I know you will not receive it for many years, if you ever receive it at all. I am sitting in a room in Saigon, and outside the window, the world is ending in ways we never imagined when we were young. You are 3 beds away from me, unconscious, and the doctors say you will live but that you may never walk again. I am writing this because I am not sure I will survive what is coming, and there are things you need to know. Father O'Brien paused, clearing his throat. Marcus had moved closer, his expensive shoes planted on the dirty sidewalk, his attention absolute. Hassan leaned against his cart, his morning sales forgotten. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, listening. We made a promise to each other, the four of us. Do you remember? That night in basic training when we were so young and so stupid and so certain we were invincible. We said that if any of us made it home, we would live for all of us. We would carry the dreams we all had, the futures we imagined. Robert wanted to be a teacher. Michael wanted to build houses. I wanted to paint. And you, Thomas, you wanted to save lives. You wanted to be a doctor, to heal people, to matter in that way. The priest's voice cracked slightly. He steadied himself. I am writing this to release you from that promise, my friend. Robert died yesterday. Stepped on something in a field that looked like every other field, and then he was gone. Michael is alive but will lose his legs, both of them, and his eyes have that look you get when something inside breaks that cannot be fixed. I am going on a mission tomorrow that I do not expect to survive. And you, my dear friend, you are lying 3 beds away with a back broken in service to keeping me alive, and I cannot bear the weight of what I have cost you. Sarah's hand had come up to cover her mouth. Marcus stood perfectly still, his face unreadable. Hassan's eyes were bright with moisture. So I release you, Thomas Reed. I release you from having to be anything other than what you are. I release you from the burden of our dreams. If you live, live for yourself. If you find joy, take it. If you find peace, rest in it. Do not carry us like stones around your neck. We were friends. We were brothers. And that is enough. That is everything. Father O'Brien's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. I am leaving this letter with Chaplain Morrison, who has promised to mail it if I do not return. By the time you read this, if you read this, years will have passed. You may be that doctor you wanted to be. You may have found another path. You may have forgotten these promises we made when we were boys playing at being men. But wherever you are, whatever you have become, know this, I loved you like a brother. We all did. And nothing, not death, not time, not any distance, can change that. Be well, Thomas. Be happy. Be free. Your friend until the end of all things, William James Morrison. Silence fell over the four of them. The city continued its noise around them, but in their small circle, there was only the weight of words written 55 years ago by a man who had loved his friend enough to release him from a promise he could not keep. Morrison, Marcus said suddenly. William James Morrison. They all looked at him. The artist, Marcus continued, his voice strange. There's a Morrison painting in the Met. Brothers in Arms. It's worth millions. He painted it in Vietnam, shipped it home before he died. The signature is William James Morrison, 1968. Hassan's eyes widened. He survived. He painted. One painting, Marcus said. Only one. Then he died in combat 3 days later. Sarah's voice was barely audible. And Thomas carried this letter for 55 years. Father O'Brien carefully refolded the letter, his hands reverent now. We need to go to the hospital. We need to be there when he wakes up. If he wakes up, Marcus said, then winced at his own words. When he wakes up, the priest repeated firmly. Someone needs to tell him. Tell him what? Sarah asked. That we read his private letter. That we know his story. That he kept his promise, Hassan said quietly. They all turned to him. The vendor gestured around them, at the street, at the morning, at the moment they were inhabiting. Look at us. A priest. A businessman. A girl on her way to build something. Me, a nobody selling coffee. We stopped. We stayed. We cared about a homeless man we've walked past 1,000 times. I don't understand, Marcus said. He wanted to save lives, Hassan continued. To heal people. To matter. Look what his letter did. Look what his story did. We are here. We are changed. Sarah felt something break open inside her chest. The job interview she had missed suddenly seemed like the smallest thing in the world. I walked past him, she said. I stepped over him without looking. We all did, Father O'Brien said gently. Every day. For years. Not anymore, Hassan said. Not after this. They stood together as the morning brightened around them. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, they began to move. Hassan locked his cart and put up a sign that read, "Back in 30 minutes." Marcus called his office and told his secretary to cancel his morning meetings. Sarah didn't even glance at her phone when it buzzed with a message from the company where she'd missed her interview. Father O'Brien led the way, the letter and photograph carefully stored in his inner jacket pocket. The hospital was 14 blocks away. They could have taken a taxi, could have arrived in minutes, but they walked. They needed the time, needed the movement, needed the slow processing of what they had just experienced. Marcus broke the silence first. I see homeless people every day, he said. I give to charities. I write checks. But I don't see them. Not really. I tell myself I do, Father O'Brien admitted. I tell myself that my work at the church is enough. But I was late to a budget meeting. I didn't stop. I was afraid, Sarah said softly. I'm always afraid in the city. Afraid of being late, afraid of missing chances, afraid of people who might want something from me. Hassan nodded. I gave him coffee twice. I thought that made me a good person. But twice in 3 years. What does that make me? They walked on. The morning crowd flowed around them, people hurrying to jobs and appointments and the endless demands of their lives. How many stories were passing by? How many letters hidden in pockets? How many promises kept or broken or carried like weights? At the hospital, they were directed to the emergency room. A nurse with tired eyes and efficient movements told them that Thomas Reed was stable but unconscious. Malnutrition. Exposure. A heart that had simply given up trying. They were running tests, administering fluids, doing what they could. Did anyone know his medical history? Did he have family? They looked at each other, these 4 strangers. We're trying to find out, Father O'Brien said. The nurse nodded. He can't have visitors yet. There's a waiting room on the 3rd floor. The waiting room was like all hospital waiting rooms, suspended in time and worry. They sat in plastic chairs, and Marcus bought coffee from a vending machine that tasted like regret. Sarah took off her broken shoe and massaged her foot. Hassan stared at his hands. Father O'Brien held the letter, reading it again in the fluorescent light. Tell us about the painting, Sarah said to Marcus. He looked up, surprised. What? The Morrison painting. You said it's in the Met. Tell us about it. Marcus leaned back in his chair. It's in the contemporary wing. 5 feet by 7 feet. Oil on canvas. It shows 4 soldiers sitting around a small fire. You can't see their faces clearly, just shadows and light. But there's something about it. The way they're positioned. The way they lean toward each other. You can feel the brotherhood. The love. He paused. I've walked past it 100 times. I never stopped to really look at it. We should go see it, Hassan said. When this is over. We should see it together. Yes, Sarah said. We should. Father O'Brien looked up from the letter. Do you believe in destiny? He asked. I believe in markets and data, Marcus said, then shrugged. Or I did. This morning, I'm not sure what I believe. I believe God puts people where they need to be, the priest said. But sometimes we're too busy to notice. I believe in luck, Hassan said. Good and bad. And I believe we make our own luck by the choices we make. Sarah was quiet for a moment. I believe we're connected, she finally said. All of us. In ways we don't understand. And sometimes something happens that reminds us of that. A doctor appeared at 11:30 a.m. Young, exhausted, but with kind eyes. Are you here for Thomas Reed? They all stood. Yes, Father O'Brien said. How is he? Stable. He's awake. Confused, but awake. He's asking for his coat. His letter, Sarah said. He wants his letter. The doctor looked at them curiously. I can only let 2 of you in. Family only, technically, but... She gestured at them, at their unlikely assembly. Who wants to see him? Father O'Brien and Hassan stood. It felt right, the priest and the vendor, the 2 who had touched him first. But Sarah shook her head. No. Father O'Brien and Marcus. You need to go. Marcus looked startled. Me? I don't. You need to go, Sarah repeated. Trust me. So the priest and the financier followed the doctor down the hall, past rooms filled with suffering and healing, until they reached a small space where Thomas Reed lay in a hospital bed, looking impossibly small against the white sheets. His eyes were open, moving around the room with the confusion of someone who had woken in the wrong world. Mr. Reed, Father O'Brien said gently. My name is Father Timothy O'Brien. This is Marcus Webb. We were there when you needed help. Thomas's eyes focused on them. His voice when he spoke was rough and used. My coat. It's here. Everything is here. The priest reached into his jacket and withdrew the envelope. This fell from your pocket. We read it. I'm sorry. We needed to know if there was family to contact. He held out the letter. Thomas's hand, thin and trembling, reached for it. His fingers closed around the envelope, and something in his face changed. Relief. Grief. Recognition. 55 years, Thomas whispered. I've carried it for 55 years. Marcus moved closer to the bed. The letter says you wanted to be a doctor. Thomas's eyes found him. I was. For a while. 8 years of medical school and residency. Then I started forgetting things. Simple things. Patients' names. Procedures. The VA said it was from the war. The trauma. The injury. They pensioned me out. His voice was flat, reciting facts. I lost my license. Then I lost my apartment. Then I lost everything else. You kept the letter, Father O'Brien said. It was all I had left of them. Of who I was supposed to be. Marcus surprised himself by sitting on the edge of the bed. The letter says you're released from that. Your friend, William, he released you. I know what it says. I've read it 10,000 times. Then why carry it? Why hold on? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Because letting go felt like forgetting them. Like saying their lives didn't matter. Their lives mattered, Marcus said, and his voice was suddenly fierce. William Morrison painted one of the most powerful pieces of art I've ever seen. He survived long enough to create something that moves people 50 years later. And you, Thomas Reed, you became a doctor. You saved lives. You did what you set out to do. For 8 years. Then I failed. No, Father O'Brien said firmly. You lived. Against odds, against injuries, against trauma that would have destroyed most men. You lived for all of them. That was the promise. Thomas looked at the letter in his hands. I'm so tired, he whispered. I know, the priest said. But you don't have to carry this alone anymore. They sat with him, the priest and the financier, while morning became afternoon. Nurses came and went. Doctors checked monitors and made notes on charts. And in that small room, Thomas Reed told them stories. About Vietnam. About the war. About 4 young men who thought they were invincible and learned otherwise in the worst possible ways. About medical school and the joy of healing and the slow, terrible slide into the streets. In the waiting room, Sarah and Hassan sat together, not talking much, just being present. Sarah's phone buzzed occasionally. Messages from friends, from her mother, from the company where she'd missed her interview. She ignored them all. Hassan's cart was locked on Fifth Avenue, his earnings for the day abandoned. Neither of them suggested leaving. When Marcus and Father O'Brien returned at 2 p.m., their faces were different. Changed. He's sleeping, the priest said. Finally peaceful. We need to help him, Marcus said abruptly. Not charity. Real help. A place to live. Medical care. Treatment. The VA should be doing that, Hassan said. Should be. But isn't. So we will. Sarah looked at him. We. Marcus met her eyes. Yes. We. All of us. He gestured around. This doesn't end here. This can't end here. What are you proposing? Father O'Brien asked. I don't know yet. But I have resources. I have connections. And you, he pointed at the priest, you have experience with housing and social services. You, to Hassan, you know the street, know the people, know what they need. And you, to Sarah, you're young and smart and I'm guessing you didn't really want that job you were interviewing for anyway. Sarah blinked. How did you? I work in finance. I read people. You were terrified, yes, but also relieved when your shoe broke. Relieved to have an excuse to fail. She wanted to argue, but couldn't. He was right. So we helped Thomas, Marcus continued. And then we figure out how to help others. How many people walk past people like Thomas every day? How many letters are being carried? How many stories are we missing? That's ambitious, Hassan said quietly. Maybe too ambitious. Everything worthwhile is too ambitious, Marcus replied. Until it isn't. They talked for hours. Planning, imagining, creating something from nothing. Father O'Brien knew of housing programs, could navigate the bureaucracy of social services. Marcus could fund it, could use his business connections to create jobs and opportunities. Hassan could be the bridge, the one who knew the streets and could be trusted. And Sarah, whose career in finance had died that morning, found herself thinking about social work, about policy, about ways to change systems that let people like Thomas Reed fall through the cracks. Thomas woke that evening. They were all there, the 4 of them, standing around his bed like sentries. He looked at them with confusion, then something like wonder. You stayed, he said. We stayed, Father O'Brien confirmed. Why? It was Sarah who answered. Because you mattered. You matter. Your story matters. I'm nobody. No, Marcus said firmly. You're somebody who kept a promise for 55 years. You're somebody who survived a war and became a doctor and never gave up, even when you lost everything. You're somebody who carried your friends' memories like sacred things. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. I just wanted them to be proud of me. They would be, Hassan said. They are. Over the following weeks, things began to change. Marcus used his connections to get Thomas into a VA program that specialized in treating veterans with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. Father O'Brien worked with social services to secure housing. Hassan visited every day, bringing coffee and conversation, becoming a friend in truth rather than just in passing. Sarah quit her job search and enrolled in a master's program in social work, her broken shoe sitting on her bookshelf as a reminder of the morning everything changed. But they didn't stop with Thomas. Marcus liquidated some investments and established a fund. Father O'Brien's church became a coordination center. Hassan used his network of street vendors to identify people who needed help. Sarah created systems, built databases, tracked outcomes. They called it the Morrison Project, named after the friend who had released his promise keeper from a debt that was never really owed. They learned quickly that solving homelessness wasn't simple. That addiction and mental illness and systemic failures created problems that money alone couldn't fix. They failed more often than they succeeded. But they kept trying. Thomas Reed moved into a small apartment in Queens in December. On the wall, he hung the photograph that had been in the envelope. For young men, brothers in arms, frozen in a moment before the world broke them. He would stand before it some mornings and speak to them, telling them about his day, about the people who had stopped, about the strange miracle of being seen after so many years of invisibility. On a cold morning in February, the four of them met at the Met. They stood before William Morrison's painting, Brothers in Arms, and looked at it with new eyes. The four figures around the fire. The shadows that suggested faces. The hands reaching toward each other across the flames. He was 23 when he painted this, Marcus said, reading the plaque. 23 years old. Younger than me, Sarah said softly. He knew, Hassan observed. You can see it in the painting. He knew how precious this was. This moment. This connection. Father O'Brien stood silent, his lips moving in what might have been prayer. They stayed there for an hour, these four people who had been strangers 6 months ago and were now bound together by something deeper than friendship. Around them, the museum flowed with tourists and students and people seeking beauty in a world that often felt devoid of it. Some stopped to look at the Morrison painting. Most passed by, hurrying to the next thing, the next moment, the next obligation. But the four of them stood and bore witness. To the young men in the painting. To the promises made and kept and released. To the letter that had fallen on a dirty sidewalk and changed everything. Thomas Reed joined them at noon. He moved slowly, still recovering, still rebuilding strength that had been lost over years of neglect. But he moved. He lived. When he saw the painting, he stopped, his hand coming up to his chest as if to keep his heart from breaking out of its cage. I never saw it, he whispered. In all these years. I never came to see it. You see it now, Father O'Brien said gently. Thomas stepped closer. His eyes traced the figures, the fire, the way the light played across the canvas. It's us, he said. That's us. That night we made the promise. He remembered, Marcus said. He never forgot, Thomas replied. None of us did. They stood together, 5 now instead of 4. The priest and the financier and the vendor and the student and the veteran. 5 people who had learned that destiny wasn't about fate or predetermination, but about the choices made in ordinary moments. About stopping when the world says to keep moving. About seeing when it's easier to look away. About staying when leaving would be simpler. The Morrison Project grew. Other people joined, inspired by the story of a letter and a painting and 4 strangers who refused to walk past someone in need. They didn't save everyone. They couldn't. But they saved some. And those some went on to save others. Ripples moving outward from a moment on Fifth Avenue when a letter fell from a pocket and everything changed. Years later, Sarah would write a book about it. She would interview Thomas extensively, recording his stories before they were lost. She would track down the families of Robert and Michael, the other brothers in arms, and learn their stories too. The book would become a bestseller, not because it was dramatic or sensational, but because it was true. Because it reminded people of something they wanted to believe, that we are not as separate as we seem. That small acts of attention can change lives. That destiny is created in the space between intention and action. Marcus would eventually leave finance. He would say it was because he found something more meaningful, but the truth was simpler. He had learned to see. And once you learn to see, you can't unsee. You can't walk past people in need and pretend they don't exist. You can't ignore the letters falling from pockets, literal or metaphorical. Father O'Brien would retire from official church duties but would never stop working. He would say it was the letter that taught him about grace. Not the grace of forgiveness, which he'd preached for 40 years, but the grace of release. The grace of being freed from promises that were never meant to be chains. Hassan would expand his coffee cart into a small cafe that hired people transitioning out of homelessness. He would serve coffee to the morning rush and remember that every person carrying a cup has a story. That every transaction is a chance to see someone, truly see them. Even if just for a moment. And Thomas Reed would live. Simply live. He would volunteer at the VA hospital, talking to younger veterans about trauma and survival and the long road back from the edge. He would carry the letter still, but differently now. Not as a weight but as a reminder. Of who he had been. Of who he had become. Of the friends who had loved him enough to set him free. On the 56th anniversary of the letter's writing, they gathered again at the Met. The group had grown. 20 people now, all connected by the Morrison Project, all carrying their own stories of being seen or learning to see. They stood before the painting, and Father O'Brien read the letter aloud, his voice steady and clear. When he finished, Thomas spoke. William said he was releasing me from the promise. But I never needed release. The promise was never a burden. It was a gift. It was love. He looked around at the faces gathered there. They loved me enough to dream with me. To believe we could be more than what the world said we were. And when William saw that the dream was killing me, he loved me enough to let it go. But you kept the dream, Sarah said. No, Thomas corrected gently. I kept the love. The dream changed. It had to. We were children when we made that promise. We didn't know what life would demand of us. What it would take. What it would give. He smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had walked through fire and found something beautiful on the other side. I didn't become the doctor I thought I would be. But maybe I became something better. Maybe I became someone who could show other people that it's never too late to be seen. To matter. To come home. They stood in silence, these unlikely companions. Outside the museum, the city roared and rushed and lived. People hurried past each other without looking. Letters fell from pockets unnoticed. Stories went untold. But inside, in front of a painting created by a young man who would die 3 days after finishing it, a different story was being written. About connection. About the ways we save each other without realizing it. About the destiny we create with small acts of attention and courage. The letter that fell on Fifth Avenue that October morning hadn't changed destiny. It had revealed it. It had shown 5 people who they already were beneath the layers of fear and rush and resignation. It had given them permission to stop. To see. To care. And in that permission, in that moment of grace, everything changed. Not because of fate or predetermination, but because people chose to change. Chose to stay instead of leaving. Chose to act instead of walking past. Chose to believe that one letter, one story, one person mattered enough to build a life around. William Morrison had written his letter believing he would not survive the war. He had been wrong about that, if only for 3 days. But he had been right about the most important thing. Love persists. Brotherhood transcends death. And promises, released or kept, bind us to each other in ways that time cannot diminish. The 4 men in the photograph were gone now. But they lived in the painting. In the letter. In Thomas Reed's memory and in the project that bore William's name. They lived in every person who stopped on a busy street to help someone in need. In every moment of genuine seeing in a world designed for blindness. Destiny, it turned out, wasn't about what would happen. It was about what could happen when people chose to open their eyes and really look. When they chose to stay instead of passing by. When they chose to believe that the person sleeping against a marble wall carried letters worth reading, stories worth hearing, dreams worth honoring. The letter fell on Fifth Avenue, and the world changed. Not all at once. Not obviously. But truly. The way spring changes winter. Gradually, then all at once. The way a single seed becomes a forest. The way a letter written in 1968 could save a life in 2023. The way destiny is always built from ordinary moments that turn out to be extraordinary. If only we stop. If only we see. If only we stay.